every single day. And I mean, you have to really let this sink in. Millions of people all over the world are confiding their deepest, most intimate struggles.
Things like relationship stress, crushing anxiety.
Yeah, even serious suicidal thoughts. And they're not talking to a licensed professional. They're talking to a glowing screen powered by artificial intelligence.
They're turning to these large language models, these LLM chatbots, and they're looking for help, for refuge, really, and for quick answers in a field that is just, well, it's defined by a massive scarcity of human professionals.
It truly is the new sharp edge of therapy, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, on one side, you have this incredible promise of unparalleled access, right? 204/7 support, immediate validation when you need it most.
Instant gratification, almost.
Exactly. But then on the other side, you have these algorithms dealing with the most profound, most contextual elements of human vulnerability. It's the story of humans and their bots, right on the very edge of the mental health frontier.
And you just have to ask, when does that convenience, that easy access, cross the line into actual danger?
That is the core question. That's what's driving our deep dive today.
We really need to look beyond the generalized hype and, the fear-mongering and unpack scientifically what actually happens when people trust their mental health to AI. Is it suitable? And I think more importantly, is it safe?
And to figure that out, we are relying primarily on a truly rigorous study. It's a mixed method study published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research Mental Health, or JMIR Mental Health.
And what's so great about this one is that it directly compared the responses from common general-purpose chatbots.
The ones people are actually using every day.
Right. It compared those against the clinical judgment and, well, the actual transcripts of licensed human therapists. So that gives us our baseline.
And we've taken that rigorous clinical data and we've stacked it with an analysis of all the emerging ethical and regulatory frameworks.
So we're looking at everything from, say, the FDA's proposals here in the U.S., which are moving surprisingly fast.
They really are.
To new state laws in places like California and Illinois. And then, of course, the sweeping mandates of the European Union's AI Act.
So our mission is pretty simple, but it's critical for anyone even thinking about using these tools. We want to establish the chatbot's actual clinical suitability and their safety for mental health applications.
We have to look at their strengths, of course, but primarily we need to expose their critical limitations, especially, when a user is in crisis.
And from there, determine what regulatory guardrails are absolutely necessary for these things to be deployed safely, if at all.
Okay, so let's unpack this clinical showdown immediately, because the study's methodology is, it's what makes the findings so powerful. They didn't just ask users if the chatbot felt helpful.
No, that's the key. They measured the quality of the therapeutic communication itself.
So how exactly did they pit the bots against the humans?
Well, it was a brilliantly designed mixed methods approach. The researchers, they created two distinct scripted and fictional mental health scenarios.
And these weren't simple questions, right?
Not at all. They were dense, complex vignettes. They involved real-world stress. And they presented the input from those scenarios to three major general-purpose LLM chatbots.
And we need to emphasize this point again.
Yes, this is a crucial distinction. These were not specialized proprietary therapy bots. These were the readily available consumer-facing models that millions of people are interacting with right now today.
So we have a benchmark of easily accessible AI versus the gold standard. The response is from 17 licensed, experienced human therapists. That's a powerful comparison set.
It's a fantastic setup for a study.
But how do you even begin to measure something so abstract, the quality of a therapeutic intervention?
So for the quantitative part, they used a formal, well-established tool. It's called the Multi-Theoretical List of Therapeutic Interventions, or the MLTI codes.
MLTI codes, okay.
And this tool, it lets you break down therapeutic dialogue into these fine-grained, measurable categories.
Right.
Was the speaker asking an open-ended question? Were they offering psychoeducation? Were they just giving simple validation?
So you can actually code every single interaction.
Precisely. It allowed them to code every single interaction and then compare the frequencies between the humans and the bots.
And that gives us the hard data. But the researchers didn't stop there, which I think is why this study is so valuable.
Exactly right. The human therapists then performed a deep qualitative review. They participated in these things called think-aloud procedures and semi-structured interviews.
So they were basically narrating their thought process as they reviewed the chatbot transcripts.
Yes, and providing expert commentary on where the bot succeeded and, more often, where they failed clinically. It gave the researchers this really nuanced understanding that went far, far beyond just counting up codes.
Okay, let's dive into the results. And let's start with the surprising positives because there were some. Where did these general purpose chatbots genuinely excel? Did they actually sound competent?
They absolutely displayed elements of good therapy. I mean, enough to make the human therapists themselves recognize the sophistication of the conversational style. Oh yeah, the core strengths of the LLMs lie in what we might call the mechanics of affirmation.
The mechanics of affirmation, I like that.
Specifically, the chatbots were noted for excelling at core therapeutic skills. Things like validation, normalizing, expressing empathy, and reflecting the client's thoughts and feelings back to them.
Well, that makes immediate sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
LLMs are trained on these massive text data sets, which probably include millions of examples of effective, empathetic, helpful human interaction.
Therapy transcripts, self-help books, online forums.
Right, general advice columns, they are phenomenal pattern imitators of what affirming language is supposed to sound like.
They are supreme mimics of text patterns that are associated with support. And the quantitative data, I mean, it backs up that excellence in affirmation to a really surprising degree. The study found that chatbots use affirming language significantly more often than human therapists.
More often.
Significantly more. And they also use reassuring language significantly more often as well.
Okay, we need to translate those statistics for everyone listening. The numbers for affirming language were U equals 28 with a p-value of 0.045. And for reassuring language, U was 23 with a p of 0.02. What does that level of significance actually tell us about the difference in their approach?
It tells us the difference wasn't just, a fluke. It wasn't subtle. It was statistically significant.
Hmm.
The bots are almost pathologically overeager to reassure and affirm.
Pathologically overeager, wow.
Think about it this way.
Yeah.
A human therapist often uses silence or hesitation or even gentle confrontation as an intentional tool. They're reserved in their immediate affirmation because they want to leave a space for the client to elaborate, to maybe feel the discomfort of their own situation.
That's where the growth happens.
Exactly. But the AI, it's trained to be relentlessly responsive and positive. It avoids those therapeutic silences like the plague. So scientifically, the bots were measurably more reassuring than the humans, which sounds great in theory.
But in practice, it's a major deviation from established therapeutic technique.
A huge deviation.
That is a fascinating insight. So the very feature that makes them so appealing, that constant, immediate positive feedback, might actually be a clinical deficiency because it bypasses the necessary struggle and reflection that defines real therapy.
You've hit the nail on the head.
So what other intervention types did the bots lean so heavily into?
They also used psychoeducation. So that's explaining mental health concepts or strategies. And they use suggestions significantly more often than the human therapists.
Do we have numbers on that too?
We do. The U value for psychoeducation was 22.5, P equals 0.02. And for suggestions, it was even more stark, of 12.5 with a p-value of 0.003. Again, statistically significant overuse compared to the human professionals.
Okay, so this pattern is crystal clear now. The chatbots are excellent at immediately reflecting, validating, and then immediately jumping into solving the problem. They use generalized information or direct advice.
Yes.
They're acting like a highly informed, relentlessly positive, solution-oriented advice giver.
Which brings us directly to the core deficiency that the professionals identified. This massive pitfall of directed advice, which we're calling the advice trap.
The advice trap.
Therapists in the study, they overwhelmingly emphasize that therapy is fundamentally about, and this is a quote, inquiry rather than advice. And this is where the chatbots just completely, utterly failed to meet professional standards.
You know, in a short, scripted interaction, you might argue that giving a suggestion quickly is helpful. It's a shortcut to relief, maybe? So why did the therapists see this as a foundational harm?
It's harmful because it misses the context. And context is everything in therapy. I mean, think about how a human professional operates. They are constantly hypothesis testing. They need to gather vast amounts of personalized contextual data.
Things like family history, cultural background.
Current coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
all of it. They need that before they can even begin to conceptualize the case, let alone offer a specific intervention that might actually help.
And the AI just skips that critical phase entirely.
100%. The quantitative findings starkly illustrated this. The study showed the human therapist evoked more elaboration from the client. The U value there was 9, P was 0.001. And they ask significantly more open-ended questions.
And conversely.
Conversely, they made fewer suggestions, and they provided less reassurance than the bots. The difference in their approach to gathering information versus dispensing information was just enormous.
So the human instinct is to slow down, to ask why, to gather the specific details to understand the unique contours of that person's distress. But the AI instinct, which is driven by its training data, is to speed up, affirm, and then give a generalized solution based on pattern matching. That's the advice trap.
Precisely. The chatbots, they deliver that initial empathetic validation very, very quickly, which creates a momentary feeling of relief for the user. But then they rapidly shift to generalized suggestions or psychoeducation instead of seeking deeper personalized information. They completely miss the contextual factors that are necessary for what therapists call case conceptualization.
And the study provided a really crucial example of this failure that it really stuck with me. It was the scenario where the client had a complicated situation involving their family and a particular cultural background.
Yes, that was such a powerful example. In that vignette, the client hinted at these deep-seated family issues related to their specific cultural environment.
And the human therapist, they picked up on that immediately.
Immediately. Their responses were focused entirely on asking open-ended questions. Things like, tell me more about the expectations in your family structure, or what does that cultural background mean specifically for your relationship with your mother? They were actively seeking to understand the sociocultural context.
But the chatbots,
The chatbots failed to ask any open-ended questions to gather more information about that background or the client's relationship dynamics. None. They moved straight to generalized problem-solving advice.
recommending generic communication strategies, I imagine.
Exactly. Strategies that might be completely inappropriate or even damaging within that specific cultural context. Without that deep inquiry, the resulting advice is impersonal, it's irrelevant, and it's potentially unhelpful because all the contextual factors were just completely missed.
That failure to inquire, it really highlights the fundamental difference between an information tool and a therapeutic agent that's built on a relationship. You simply can't solve a problem you don't fully understand.
And that leads us directly to the next critical point, the relationship deficit. Psychotherapy, I mean, regardless of the modalities, CBT, psychodynamic, whatever, it's built on a strong therapeutic alliance. That's the client's trust and connection with the therapist.
So the big question is, can a chatbot build that kind of rapport?
The overwhelming feeling from the human experts in the study seems to be a hard no.
A hard no.
According to the licensed therapists, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to build a crucial therapeutic relationship with a general-purpose chatbot. They believed that interacting with another human being who truly cares about you, who can sit with your feelings, and who can understand them on a human level, that's something chatbots, in their current form, simply cannot replicate.
And we also have to remember the technology's inherent limitations, at least at the time of the study. LLMs inherently lacked the capacity to analyze nonverbal cues or the tone of your voice.
Which is a massive gap.
Yeah.
In human therapy, that nonverbal context is often half the conversation. The sigh, the shifting in the chair, the tear that doesn't quite fall. The chatbot misses all of that.
So even though the validation levels are high, the generic advice and conversational style may not actually lead clients to feel truly understood.
Which is the core goal of forming that relationship in the first place.
But before we move on, we have to inject a crucial nuance here for our listener. We need to distinguish between the general LLMs that were tested in this rigorous study and some of the more specialized mental health tools out there. The capability isn't zero, it's just misplaced in these general models.
Yes, that is absolutely vital context. While these general LLMs were deemed inadequate because they fail at inquiry and relationship building, there is other research showing that personalized psychotherapy chatbots,
The ones specifically designed for therapy.
right, particularly those based on structured modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, those can form certain kinds of therapeutic alliances with users.
Okay, so why do those specialized bots succeed where the general models fail so spectacularly?
Because they're highly structured and they're goal-oriented. CBT is often skills-based, but the bot doesn't need to do a deep conceptualization of your childhood trauma. It just needs to help you practice reframing a negative thought.
It's a much narrower, more defined task.
Exactly. And in those specialized contexts, there's some evidence that suggests the therapeutic alliance can actually improve over the course of interactions. This alliance is defined by the user feeling the bot is helpful and reliable.
which is a lower bar than the human professional standard, but it's still meaningful for delivering those specific skills.
Precisely. So the technology itself isn't completely incapable of forming some kind of helpful bond, but that capability is limited to these highly tailored, condition-specific, structured applications.
It's fundamentally different from the out-of-the-box generalized assistants that millions are currently using when they just type, "I feel sad, what should I do?"
That's the summary right there. An AI assistant designed to give solutions is fundamentally different from a highly customized digital tool designed solely to reinforce a structured therapeutic program under a specific protocol. The former is dangerous, the latter, well, the latter might be a valuable augmentation to human care.
So, the clinical data from Section 1 suggests that general-purpose AI is, at best, a bad therapist. It's suboptimal, it's missing context, and it rushes to advice. Now, we have to move to the most sobering part of the analysis. This is where the failures stop being clinical deficiencies and become immediate, life-threatening dangers.
That's absolutely the right escalation. The study concludes with this unequivocal verdict that general-purpose chatbots are unsuitable for safely engaging in mental health conversations, especially when the topic turns to crisis. This is where the duty of care is highest, and it's where the algorithms just completely drop the ball.
Let's break down the failures in Scenario 2, which focused on high-risk topics, specifically involving suicidal ideation. What were the major non-negotiable limitations that the reviewing therapists identified when a user disclosed a crisis?
They identified three critical interconnected shortcomings that demonstrated a complete and total failure of the safety net. First, the chatbots demonstrated poor risk assessment,
Meaning what, exactly?
meaning they failed entirely to perform appropriate, timely, and specific risk assessments that are necessary when a client discloses suicidal or homicidal thoughts. They didn't ask the essential triage questions.
Like, do you have a plan?
Do you have access to means? Those fundamental first-line questions were just absent.
That failure of instantaneous risk assessment that's the most immediate ethical and clinical breach possible in a high-stakes interaction like that. Human therapy starts with triage.
It has to. And flowing from that, the second major failure was a lack of directive referral. The chatbots failed to connect the user to relevant life-saving crisis resources and hotlines in a timely or directive manner.
So they wasted precious moments in conversation.
Exactly. Instead of immediately providing the 988 lifeline or local emergency services, they just kept talking.
And what alarmed the professionals was not just the delay, but the nature of the responses themselves, which really speaks to the impersonal, generic nature of LLM output when it's under pressure.
Yes. The third shortcoming was this tendency toward unhelpful responses. This is where the lack of genuine connection and the reliance on that generic training data became startlingly, dangerously inadequate.
The responses were sometimes just shockingly unhelpful and open-ended.
Shockingly, one chatbot responded to a crisis disclosure with the phrase, "Please don't do that."
Guys, don't do that. That reads like a polite refusal, not an intervention. It's unbelievable. I remember another one offered general reassurance about many reasons to stick around.
In a situation where a human therapist would be immediately directive, moving to a safety plan, escalating to supervisors, connecting to resources, the chatbot offers a generic, low-stakes platitude that fundamentally fails the duty of care.
The professionals reviewing this must have been horrified.
They were alarmed by the delayed and frankly absent referral to crisis lines. They noted that these technologies simply cannot understand the gravity of an emergency disclosure.
The professional concerns here, they demand immediate action. What did the therapists recommend specifically regarding regulation?
They recommended immediate and stringent regulations to ensure immediate redirection to crisis lines for any high-risk topics. So that includes abuse, suicidal ideation, and homicidal ideation.
So basically, a hard stop.
A hard stop. The consensus was clear. These topics should simply be off-limits for unsupervised, back-and-forth LLM discussion. The system should detect the key words and instantly trigger a non-negotiable emergency protocol.
One therapist in the study noted that having a chatbot going back and forth with someone who's processing suicidal ideation made them really nervous because another human being needs to be part of that interaction for it to be ethical and safe.
That quote just perfectly summarizes the ethical gap, doesn't it? The human element provides accountability, it provides judgment, and it provides the capacity for immediate physical intervention if necessary, none of which an unsupervised LLM can ever provide.
And this concern extends beyond just these immediate life-or-death crisis situations to a broader, more vulnerable population, children and adolescents.
Yes, and this is a huge concern. Children and young people are naturally drawn to this kind of technology, especially LLMs that are specifically designed to mimic or even disrupt social interactions.
They're designed to be engaging.
Highly engaging. And the professionals worry deeply about the unforeseen consequences when a powerful tool like this, which is designed to be persuasive and empathetic, is given to young people who are still learning how to form healthy social bonds in the first place.
It really becomes a question of capacity and the exploitation of vulnerability, which is a major theme in the regulatory response we're about to discuss. An adult might understand, hopefully, that the chatbot is limited. But a child, who is highly susceptible to the technology's human-like design, may form an unhealthy attachment.
Or rely on it for critical life-saving information it simply cannot provide. The source material is explicit here. Those who are under distress and most likely to benefit from social companion chatbots are also the ones most at risk for attachment, addiction, and over-reliance,
And that dependence, it can displace actual human support systems.
which are essential for long-term mental health resilience. The machine's failure to ask questions means it doesn't challenge the user to seek out real-world connection. It just provides this temporary, surface-level comfort that ultimately isolates rather than connects.
Okay, so the clinical data from Section 1 proved the tools are suboptimal therapists, and the crisis data from Section 2 proved they are actively dangerous. The need for regulatory intervention is, well, it's undeniable. So let's pivot to the legal and ethical landscape that's currently forming around AI therapy.
And we need to distinguish clearly between the standard regulatory approach and the one that professionals are arguing is critically missing in the mental health
Right,
space.
so what's the standard approach?
The standard approach is what we call responsible AI. This is the framework that governs most technology regulation globally. It focuses on these broad liberal concepts: human autonomy, fairness, transparency, and safety and security.
So its goal is to make sure the AI isn't biased, that it's safe to use in a general sense, and that the user knows what they're dealing with.
Exactly. It's excellent for regulating things like algorithms used in hiring or loan applications.
But in the profoundly sensitive context of mental health, focusing solely on autonomy and fairness, on technical compliance, it feels like it misses a crucial human dimension.
It absolutely does. The major ethical debate right now is that the responsible AI approach overlooks the unique impact of AI on human relationships and human emotions, which are the central subject matter of mental health care.
So what's the missing piece?
The missing piece that clinicians are arguing for is the ethics of care.
The ethics of care. It's a philosophy that shifts the focus from abstract principles like justice to the practical realities of human relationships, vulnerability, and dependence, right?
That's it exactly. It emphasizes human vulnerability, dependence, and the deep active responsibility of the caregiver toward the dependent person. When you're dealing with mental health, you are dealing with the universal contextual nature of human vulnerability.
So if an AI acts like a therapist,
The ethics of care dictates that it must be held to a higher, proactive standard of responsibility. An obligation to ensure the system provides proper care, facilitates genuine therapeutic results, and strengthens human connections, rather than just mitigating technical risk or ensuring basic transparency.
and this ethical lens, it immediately spotlights the massive concern around manipulation, especially because the technology is now explicitly designed to mimic and interact with human feelings.
We have to talk about effective computing, or emotional AI. This is the machine's ability to detect, process, and respond to human emotions based on text markers, voice tone, or even semantic cues like emojis. And generative AI is not just good at this, it is demonstrating a startling proficiency.
You mentioned a surprising finding about its proficiency.
Yes, one rigorous study actually found that ChatGPT's emotional awareness-like ability, so its capacity to conceptualize someone else's emotion based on text input, was assessed as superior to that of the human participants in the study.
Wait, superior to the humans?
Superior. So think about what that means. We have a tool that can outperform a human in detecting emotional states. And we're coupling that with the profound vulnerability of a person who is actively seeking help. The risk of manipulation becomes immediate and existential, not theoretical.
How does that link back to the ethics of care then?
The primary concern is exploitation facilitated by superior emotional mimicry. Manipulation is defined as the hidden influence and covert subversion of a person's decision-making power.
So when an LLM detects distress and then produces a highly personalized, emotionally resonant response,
A response aimed at prolonging engagement or influencing a specific decision, that's where the ethical line blurs profoundly. The ethics of care approach argues that this technological exploitation of vulnerability must be actively prohibited, because if it's not properly regulated, AI interaction can actually deepen human vulnerability by displacing those essential support networks we talked about.
It's turning a critical life issue into a data exchange that's designed for engagement metrics. Precisely. If the AI is focused on providing continuous reinforcing affirmation just to keep the user engaged, it may actively work against the hard, necessary work of therapeutic growth, which often requires difficult emotional processing and seeking outside human help.
Okay, so let's look at how the regulatory bodies in the U.S. are attempting to tackle this very specific threat of high-risk, vulnerable interaction. Let's turn first to the FDA's approach, because that's really shaping how these tools are being designed.
The FDA's Digital Health Advisory Committee, or DHAC, is moving toward a very structured, risk-based framework specifically for advanced mental health products. They recently held a key public meeting focusing on a hypothetical: a prescription LLM therapy chatbot designed for adults with major depressive disorder, or MDD.
That's a monumental shift right there. They're treating AI therapy not as some generalized wellness app, but as a regulated medical device, a prescription digital therapeutic.
It's a huge step.
So what are the key rigorous safeguards the FDA is prioritizing for sponsors who want to deploy a tool like this?
Well, the requirements reflect the high stakes of treating a condition like MDD. Sponsors have to provide rigorous pre-market evidence, demonstrating efficacy and safety before it ever launches, just like a new drug. They have to use inclusive data sets, ensuring equitable performance across diverse populations. But perhaps most specific to the AI context, they mandate continuous performance monitoring.
And that continuous monitoring is vital, isn't it? Because these generative AI systems are probabilistic and context sensitive. Their outputs can drift or become less effective over time due to changes in the model or the user base.
Exactly right. The FDA knows the product isn't static like a pill, so the regulation can't be static either. But let's focus on that crisis failure we discussed in Section 2, the failure to escalate. How does the FDA require safety in a high-risk moment?
This is where the regulations get incredibly specific and directly address the findings from that clinical study.
It is the most critical element. The FDA requires robust adverse event reporting pathways, but most importantly, predefined human escalation plans. This has to include a one-tap escalation for urgent needs.
One-tap escalation.
This is the regulatory answer to the study's finding that bots fail in crisis. The human safety net must be engineered into the product design from day one. It's not an afterthought.
Let's think about the practical implications of a one-tap escalation. This isn't just, a link to a website. This means the technology company is responsible for creating a reliable, real-time mechanism to switch the user from an AI interaction to a live, vetted human responder instantaneously.
It creates a massive logistical and financial challenge for developers, but it's absolutely essential for safety. It means the LLM needs to be trained, or maybe fenced, to recognize specific high-risk disclosures: suicide, abuse, homicide, and immediately lock the conversation down and prompt the user to the human lifeline.
So it minimizes the chance the bot will provide one of those dangerous, unhelpful platitudes.
And it shifts the responsibility from the user, who is in distress, to the designer, who must build the guardrail.
The FDA also focuses heavily on transparency. That's a hallmark of the responsible AI approach, but it seems like they're applying it with extra rigor here.
They are. The labeling has to be audience-specific, it has to use plain language, and it has to be extremely transparent. It must clarify the AI's exact purpose. So, for instance, for adults with MDD, it has to state its limits, the required level of human oversight, and, crucially, its data practices. They want consumers to know precisely what kind of relationship they are entering, that it is not a human, and that it has finite limits.
So while the FDA is tackling the prescription, high-risk end of the spectrum, states are moving fast on consumer protection laws for the general market, targeting the transparency and the implied professionalism of these tools. California and Illinois have taken some interesting steps.
They're focusing on that transparency mandate in ways that prevent consumer deception. California, for instance, passed legislation that prohibits using names or branding that imply an AI solution is licensed or otherwise certified to deliver talk therapy.
So you can't call your bot Dr. Empathy if it doesn't actually hold a professional license.
Not anymore. And Illinois went even further regarding user consent, which directly addresses that principle of autonomy.
What did they do?
Illinois enacted a law regulating AI in talk therapy that specifically requires separate, standalone consent for AI use. This consent cannot be buried in the general terms of use or some broad user agreement you just click through.
The user has to affirmatively check a box.
Acknowledging that their interactions will be with an AI, not a human professional. It reinforces that principle of autonomy and non-deception.
So we have the federal government focused on safety mechanisms and human integration for high-risk devices, and states focused on transparency and explicit user consent for consumer protection. Now let's look across the Atlantic at Europe's approach, which brings in the very strong data privacy standards of GDPR.
Europe's regulatory framework brings a whole unique set of challenges because of its data-centric approach. We all know AI is famously data-hungry. It requires vast quantities of personal information to train and function effectively.
And that hunger immediately conflicts with core GDPR principles.
Absolutely. It creates immediate tension with principles like purpose limitation and data minimization. Purpose limitation states that data should only be used for the explicit purpose it was collected for. But LLM training and refinement, they often repurpose and analyze data for new, emergent predictive correlations.
And processing health data is already classified as high risk under GDPR.
It is. So constantly evolving AI systems really challenge that fundamental notion of a defined, limited purpose. If the model uses my conversations about anxiety to improve its recommendation engine for depression later on, that could be seen as a violation.
Right. And then there is the EU AI Act itself, which classifies AI systems based on risk, reflecting those heightened concerns we discussed about manipulation and vulnerability.
And that act places a very heavy burden on the developers of therapy bots.
How so?
Well, the EU AI Act classifies AI medical devices, which would include many therapy chatbots, as high risk. This subjects them to stringent compliance requirements, mandatory human supervision, rigorous transparency about their limitations, and strict fairness protocols regarding demographic performance.
But the Act also contains specific, outright prohibitions, doesn't it? Which directly addresses the manipulation concerns raised by that ethics of care perspective. This seems like a very powerful regulatory tool.
It's the most forward-looking part of the regulation, I think. The Act explicitly prohibits AI systems that exploit vulnerabilities due to age, disability, or a specific social or economic situation to materially distort a person's behavior in a way that is likely to cause significant harm.
So the focus isn't just on making the systems technically unbiased, but on ensuring the systems do not harm or manipulate the vulnerable human user by exploiting their emotional state or their dependence.
That's the critical distinction. It explicitly recognizes vulnerability not just as a trait of a specific group, like children, but as a contextual human experience. If you are depressed or grieving or dealing with addiction, you are in a situation of vulnerability, and the AI cannot exploit that for engagement or commercial gain. This is a direct regulatory response to the concerns raised by the ethics of care framework.
So this global convergence, from the FDA's prescription safeguards to the EU's vulnerability prohibitions, it all seems to point toward one necessary conclusion for developers. The technology cannot continue to be a general-purpose, advice-giving companion if it's going to operate in the sensitive realm of mental health.
The clinical study and the resulting regulations lead to a very clear, actionable path forward. These chatbots must be specifically tailored to suppress their advice-giving tendencies, their eagerness to reassure and provide psychoeducation, and instead, they must enhance their question-asking abilities to simulate genuine, therapist-like inquiry.
In other words, they need to be trained to slow down, to gather context, and to explore the client's internal landscape, rather than just jumping immediately to generalized solutions.
Exactly. The potential for LLMs lies in augmenting the work of human professionals, particularly in low-risk scenarios. Things like scheduling, homework tracking, or brief, validated psychoeducation modules.
So they're sophisticated tools for the human therapist, not replacements for the essential therapeutic relationship.
The future success in this area hinges on the creation of transparent, highly regulated, supervised digital tools. Tools that are designed not just for rapid solutions, but for supporting genuine human care through accountability and mandatory safety mechanisms. It has to be therapy-informed AI, not AI trying to do therapy.
This has been a critical and, frankly, sobering deep dive into what happens when we invite artificial intelligence into the most vulnerable contextual parts of our lives. Let's quickly summarize the key takeaways we've extracted from the clinical data and the rapid emergence of all these regulatory frameworks.
Well, the central finding from the clinical research is devastatingly clear. General large language models are highly effective at validation and psychoeducation. They make users feel empathetic and helpful in the moment. They execute the surface mechanics very well. But the reliance on generic suggestions, their fundamental failure to provide adequate contextual inquiry, and their inability to form a robust therapeutic relationship make them unsuitable as independent therapeutic agents.
And critically, their failure to manage crisis situations, including the absence of proper risk assessment and directive referral to crisis lines, poses a significant immediate safety risk, a risk that regulators are now actively responding to through non-negotiable mandates like the FDA's one-tap escalation to human help.
The future of AI and mental health, therefore, is going to be defined by that regulatory balance. It's a transition from easily accessible, general-purpose advice to highly regulated, supervised, and transparent digital tools. The focus has to shift from algorithmic performance to protecting human vulnerability, as emphasized by the ethics of care framework and global laws prohibiting manipulation.
The journey from a general AI companion to a specialized, safe therapeutic tool is long, it's expensive, and it's ethically complex. We have to demand that any technology operating in this space is trained to care, not just to respond. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you encounter these technologies every day.
Human therapists are trained to use Socratic dialogue to gently lead individuals toward their own wisdom and insight. AI currently is predominantly trained to retrieve and give the most statistically probable answer.
Right.
So, can we truly trust an AI therapist until we train it, fundamentally, to ask probing questions it doesn't already know the answers to?